to another episode of Big Small Talks. Today we have the pleasure to be with Jarno Aantjes
Thank you,
from
Pachi.
ReadSpeaker. In fact, this week we are attending MoodleMoot Global 2025, which is the largest Moodle event in the world every year. So it's the place to be, right?
Absolutely,
For Moodle
absolutely.
partners. So we know that ReadSpeaker is everything about accessibility, especially text to voice and vice versa, I guess. Everything about accessibility, and today we have some of the questions are related to accessibility, which is becoming quite important nowadays, especially in higher education. Jarno is responsible for education at ReadSpeaker. Some of the areas that you work in are Europe, Middle East, Africa as well. And we just wanted to have a couple of questions with you, Jarno. So we know that even though we have different, of course, regions, different countries, we have different legislations and frameworks
Correct.
in every country. It's a bit atomized, if I may say. However, institutions around the globe, what would you say is the main accessibility framework, or what main points should they need to consider?
Very good question. It's for a lot of institutions struggle with the majority, the complexity around accessibility legislation, because every country has its own laws.
Mhm.
Now, luckily, it all boils down or takes back to the United Nations.
All right.
And the United Nations, in the the Human Rights Commission,
Yeah.
has set up the definition of accessibility and is the driving legislative force
Yeah.
to which every local accessibility legislation actually results from.
All right.
So, knowing that all the local legislation that might differ from one another. I mean, the European Accessibility Act is slightly different from the Americans with the Disability Act. Even the Brazilian legislation is slightly even more strict.
Okay.
It has a different reach. So, and if you compare it to the South African National Plan for Inclusion, there's differences. So, if a university from Europe needs to take different boxes, different requirements than those in Africa and those in Latin America and all the different countries. But knowing that all those local laws, all those local guidelines, all boil down to the European Union's, United Nations legislation, that's the common factor. And all of it is based on the web guidelines from the Web Accessibility Initiative by W3C, the World Wide Web Committee.
So in summary, we could say that the UN sets kind of common ground, right?
They set the common ground based on the expertise of World Wide Web Consortium.
Mm-hmm.
So if you really want to summarize it all, what institutions need to do, they need to make sure that their content ticks all the boxes of the WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. You need to publish an accessibility statement, and you need to make sure that the tools you are using for e-learning are indeed fully accessible and compliant with the ATAG, the Authoring Tools Accessibility Guidelines.
So we know that one of the main reasons sometimes why institutions look for accessibility is many times compliance with maybe the national requirements, but we also are aware that they may obtain other benefits as well, both institutions and end users. What would you say are the main benefits for both institutions and users in terms of accessibility?
Very good question again. Now, there's two ways of looking at this particular question or this particular matter of accessibility legislation. There is the legal requirement, and of course the benefit from complying with the legal requirement is you are not breaking the law. You cannot be fined, or there's no way of people asking you to take corrective measures. So that's the risk side of things. But there's of course also the reward side of things. By making sure that your e-learning is accessible, is following the POUR acronym for perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust content, make sure that users can better engage, better interact with your material inside of your e-learning, means happy students,
Indeed.
inclusive environment, and that is shown to indeed improve course completion results, course completion times. And it all again boils down to happy students are retained students. Because especially nowadays with educational budgets being cut
Yes.
across a lot of countries in the world, retaining students, making sure that they succeed and not bump into barriers is a very high priority for many institutions. Because yeah, retaining a student means retaining tuition fees.
It is. Indeed.
So accessibility has turned into a financial focus and a financial reward for institutions as well.
And my next question, we know, of course, ReadSpeaker, you have created and you provide a service, but I would say also during the years you obtain substantial expertise about national, regional accessibility regulations and frameworks. I would say, maybe I'm mistaken, but I would say ReadSpeaker also helps institutions to educate in their
Yeah.
local requirements. How do you support institutions across the globe in terms of providing them with the necessary information on
Yeah, yeah.
compliance? And,
Well, we try to create a much awareness around this
Mhm.
topic, and not just awareness about what legislation is or accessibility in general is, or how to achieve it, what you need to do.
Yes.
But we try to provide as many independent information as well. So
All right.
direct information from organizations like CAST, which you can find on cast.org, or by AHEAD, a European organization, ahead.ie. But also information directly on w3.org, the W3C's website. It has vast repositories on accessibility, on inclusivity, and especially also on universal design. Because
Okay.
especially in education, if you start to work with universal design for learning principles, you automatically work towards more accessible, and even that's extra step beyond a more inclusive e-learning experience. And that's what we try to share. That's what we try to promote and create awareness on.
That's good. And when it comes to an institution, when they commit to improving their accessibility level, the overall accessibility level, would you summarize like the main guidelines or the main steps they need to accomplish to have an acceptable and satisfactory accessibility standard? What would be the
Absolutely.
main points, the most relevant points, if I may say?
Well, of course, the main point is to make sure that you at least comply with the minimum requirements. So
Okay.
comply with WCHG. In most cases, that's the WCHG 2.2 AA level.
Yeah.
Could be different across legislation. That's where the minute difference are. Uh, Publish an accessibility statement, and almost in all cases, make sure to have your tools and your content also comply to the authoring tools accessibility guidelines 2.0. Again, also guidelines by W3C itself. So they created WCAG and ATAG
Okay.
guidelines. Now, that is the strict minimum.
Yes.
We always advise look at your e-learning from a universal design for learning perspective. This isn't just another hype or a fad. No, it's a belief on creating with inclusion in mind from the very get-go. So instead of amending or adopting or adjusting your existing tools or your existing content, no, when you're creating new content from the bottom up, from scratch, start working from a universal design for learning perspective. And those are very simple, if I have to be honest.
It is.
Keep contrast in mind, make sure that you have video captions. So I'm quite certain you're going to have video captions for this
We
one,
will.
right?
We will.
We will, good. That's a good
Definitely will.
commitment. But also provide alternative descriptions, the images, and definitely provide alternative formats for students or learners to engage with the content.
Yes.
Don't just offer text, but also offer images or audio, or let them listen to content. Those are our advices that we always try to
Thanks.
promote as much as possible.
Thanks for your advice, Jarno. And that's now I like to just share the last question. Usually in these conversations, the last question is usually regarding the future,
Yeah.
right? How do you see the accessibility environment, the accessibility standards, the accessibility
Mm-hmm.
area in general evolving during the next years? What
Ooh.
should institutions expect during next years regarding accessibility? especially digital accessibility, which is what we're talking about.
Well, if you look at the changes in legislation on digital accessibility or web accessibility, or even accessibility in general, specifically on WCAG, so web content
Yes.
accessibility guidelines. W3C is already preparing the next steps. So the next, like I said, the 2.2 is currently the most commonly used minimum standard. In some cases, still one of the older standards, 2.2, is still referenced to. And they're working on a 2.3 and a 2.4. So that will come. So preparing your institution right now in order to make sure that you comply with the current standards is a good start in order to make sure that once new standards are published, are put into effect in order to comply with, that's the best starting point that you can find. So if you want to know my opinion,
Yeah.
it's here to stay. It's in the law, it's legal, you have to comply, and this will further continue with new and improved guidelines, higher standards, in order to make sure that, and it's not to force people or institutions. No, the end goal is to make sure that every learner, every student, without any visual or maybe even invisible disabilities, they have the right to participate. So the goal is to make sure that everyone is included, can participate, and has an equal opportunity to participate and to succeed in their education. Because it's a basic human right.
It is. It is indeed. Thanks very much, Jarno, for your
Thank you very much
insights.
for having me.
Of course, of course. So stay tuned for other episodes as well of Big Small Talks. See you next time.
Maybe you should just get